just think housing mortgages fail.
Dr. Tony Evans says the past economic meltdowns were more than just a wake-up call for Wall Street.
Unless you and I understand destructive things in our lives are not merely natural phenomenons that take place, then we will only use natural means to fix it.
This is The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans, author, speaker, senior pastor of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas, Texas, and president of the Urban Alternative. Have you ever tried to get your point across to someone who simply wasn't paying attention? Today, Dr. Evans talks about how God experiences that same kind of frustration with us. Let's join him.
When 9/11 hit and the World Trade Center was destroyed by terrorists and thousands of American lives were lost, the President of the United States and the Congress called America to a solemn assembly. The normal activities of the nation were suspended. When we were affected in a way we did not expect, that shook the very core of our foundations, it became very clear that whatever we were dealing with was a lot bigger than we anticipated. On that day, everybody went to church. That was not a time for laughing or joking or playing, because things were too serious. As the President and Congress gathered together in Washington, it was televised on CNN across the nation. It was indeed a solemn assembly because it was a serious situation. It was a call to a sacred gathering because of a crisis we neither understood nor knew how to fix. The book of Joel is a book calling God's people to a serious sacred gathering. What he calls more than once in these few chapters, a solemn assembly. A serious sacred gathering of God's people. Why did he call them to this gathering? Well, he tells you in verse 4 of chapter 1, what the gnawing locusts have left, the swarming locusts have eaten. And what the swarming locusts have left, the creeping locusts have eaten. And what the creeping locusts have left, the stripping locusts have eaten. Israel, God's people, were undergoing a locust invasion. Every 17 years, the state of Maryland and the city that I was born and raised in of Baltimore experiences this invasion. Last year was the 17th year. And I happened to had been home or had to go to Baltimore, and I got off the plane and walked down the baggage claim, and I'm seeing people swatting and stomping and running because that was the time of the invasion. These things covered cars, were flying in people's hair. It was horrific. They live underground for 17 years. And then they come to the surface to mate, then to bury their eggs for the next 17-year cycle. This was a locust invasion. And this locust invasion had wrought havoc. Now, if you are an agrarian people, that is, if you are a farming community and your community survives on the farmland and you have a locust invasion, your economy is in trouble because you live and die by the work of the farm, by the planting and the harvesting. Israel is an agrarian society. It is an agricultural environment. And as you read in verse 1, the locusts were coming in waves. What one group of locusts didn't get, the next group got. And what that group didn't get, the next group got. And it went on and on and on and on and on. And it was wreaking havoc in the nation. In fact, he says in chapter 1, verse 6, "For a nation has invaded my land, mighty without number. Its teeth are like the teeth of a lion, and it has the fangs of lioness. It has made my vine a waste, and my fig tree splinters. It has stripped them bare and cast them away." It was wreaking havoc on Israel's economic stability. It was an economic crisis. This crisis is described as the day of the Lord. Verse 15 of chapter 1, "Alas for the day of the Lord is near, and it will come as destruction from the Almighty." The locust invasion, described in verse 1, is called the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord's destruction. There are 2 days in the Bible: the day of man and the day of the Lord. The day of man is when man appears to be calling the shots. Man appears to be running the show. It's when you say, "Boy, I can't believe people would do that," because it looks like men are having their way. But there's another day. It's called the day of the Lord. It is when God decides to no longer let man call shots anymore, and where he directly intervenes in the human situation in order to bring judgment that he might bring restoration. In other words, the reason that there was a locust invasion is because God was now making a spiritual point. But God's people back then, like God's people today, failed to make the connection between what appears to be a natural phenomenon and the supernatural work of God. We just think housing mortgages fail. We just think the economy has tanked because we've not made the connection between economic disaster and the day of the Lord. The Bible notes numbers of ways in which God manifests himself. He manifests himself meteorologically through weather patterns, the Bible says. Here he uses the force of nature through locusts, and destruction was ruling. And it was the day of the Lord. They needed to now understand the spiritual components behind their economic disaster. God said, "These are not just locusts, these are my locusts. My army that is devouring your crops and causing your chaos." Unless you and I understand that the destructive things in our lives are not merely natural phenomenons that take place, but the visitation of God, then we will only use natural means to fix it and not spiritual means to get it right. The call for a solemn assembly was because there was a crisis that they could not fix. One of the ways you know it's a divine visitation is men can't fix it. You can't fix it. The folk you know can't fix it. The folk you thought had the power to fix it won't fix it. There is no human solution. That means it's not man's day. It's the day of the Lord. You and I are driven to the doctor when the over-the-counter stuff won't work. You've tried it over the counter. You've tried to fix it yourself. You've tried to do it yourself. You've used all the homemade remedies that you can think of or know about, and nothing is working, and so you are driven to somebody else. God knows how to drive us back to him by creating negative scenarios that men can't fix. Over-the-counter solutions won't work. He calls them to a solemn assembly to blow the trumpet in Zion, the official call, because there was a spiritual issue. And if they wanted to fix the locust problem, they had to deal with the locust sender. He said, this is a time of weeping, of mourning, of sadness, and of sorrow. We all like comedy shows. We all like to laugh. We all like to party. We all like to have fun. Nothing wrong with that, but you don't do that on this day. If you're really sick, partying is not on your mind. If you're really sick, comedy shows are not what you're after. You're after help and healing. If you have lost your job in this crisis, it's not funny, because you're facing something now that is detrimental to you and your family's well-being. A solemn assembly is not a fun time. That's not a time where you're laughing and you're shouting and you're celebrating. There are times for that. On New Year's Eve, we celebrated and we embraced one another with joy as we end one year and began another year. That's not a solemn assembly. The solemn assembly is a serious gathering. This is deadly serious because God has manifested himself in a way that allows for and actually brings about destruction.
So what did God expect out of that solemn assembly? Dr. Evans will have the answer when he continues our message in just a moment. First, I want to let you know that today's the last day to take advantage of our special offer on Tony's current teaching series, Revive Us Again. This collection is the perfect way to spark a revival in your own life that can spread to your family, your church, and beyond. And when you make a donation to help us keep Tony's teaching on this station, we'll send you this 14-CD set as our thank you gift. So visit us right away at tonyevans.org or call our 24-hour resource center at 1-800-800-3222 to make the arrangements before this special offer ends. Something else to check out. If you believe our nation needs a major transformation, Tony's popular movie Kingdom Men Rising is now available on DVD. It's a dramatic look at how everything can change when men step up to their God-given responsibilities. Watch it with your spouse or experience it together with your church's men's group. Get details on Kingdom Men Rising at tonyevans.org. I'll have our contact information again for you a little later on, but right now let's get back to our lesson. Here's Dr. Evans.
What was God after? Chapter 2, verse 12. Return to me with all your heart, with fasting, weeping, and mourning. Verse 13, rend your heart, not your garments. Now return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness, and relenting of evil. What's the purpose for a solemn assembly? Returning to God. That's the purpose. Why was there a locust invasion? Because they had left God. Why was there deterioration in their economy? Because they had left God. It was because they had left God, which is why he has to tell them to return, that chaos ruled in their world. If chaos is ruling in your world, if the locusts, the circumstances are chewing up everything you're trying to plant and produce, every time you're trying to go forward, if you're being driven back, then you must at least raise the question, have I left God? See, the question then is not, have I met the right people? Am I hanging out in the right places? Am I employing the right strategy? That's not the question. The question now is, have I left God? He says, return to me It's like a sergeant calling his troops to an about face. To come, you're pointed in the wrong direction. You're going the wrong way. It's another word for repentance. A change of mind that reverses a direction. Instead of going away from God, now I'm coming back to God. But he explains what he means by coming back to God. And this is to be your focus and our focus during this solemn assembly that we ourselves have called. He says that this returning to God is a return of the heart and not merely a tearing of the garment. You see, when religious people back then were in a solemn assembly, they would often put on sackcloth and ashes, sort of a canvas kind of cloth, or they would rend or tear their clothes without returning their hearts. The solemn assembly only works if your heart's in it. It doesn't work just because your body shows up. The solemn assembly only works if this is internally driven and not merely externally driven. If you're merely going through a formality, you've wasted your time. We all have a heart. You're here today because your heart's working. The fundamental function of your heart is to pump blood throughout your body because the source of life in your body is blood. The job of the heart is to keep the blood flowing. That's why a heart attack is corrosion of the vessels so that the blood is no longer able to flow. When you get your heart examined, they're checking the flow of the blood because everything else banks on that. Parts of the body die when they don't get the blood. The brain can die, or limbs can't function properly because they must have the blood. Therefore, they need the pump to get the blood there. The pump's called the heart. Well, God says what we have in us spiritually is like what we have in us physically. That's why he uses the word. When he says, come to me with all of your heart, he is saying, relate to me as your fundamental source. Just like the blood gets everywhere because the heart is pumping, so I am to flow fully throughout your life because I am the center. I am the boom, 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 boom. I am the heartbeat, the reference point for you. Simply showing up won't work, he says. Simply looking the part won't do. There must be, as a part of this, a sincere inner desire to allow me to reclaim the pumping part of your life, the source, for everything else, because the blood is pumped for everything else. I am to be the source for everything else. It is relinquishing the self-life for the God life. It is no longer simply going through ritual, doing the thing because I'm supposed to. It is now the relational. It is, I want to return to you. I want a relational priority with God. That's why he calls for fasting. He calls for fasting because of the relational priority. You return to me, and he says, and I will return to you. How important was this assembly? Consecrate a fast, verse 15. Gather the people, sanctify the congregation, get the elders involved, get the children involved, and the nursing infants. Tell the bride and the bridegroom to come out of that chamber. Now, if there's any time you don't want to be dealing with a solemn assembly, it's on your honeymoon. He was saying this to illustrate how serious the gathering is, how important the assembling is, the suspension of normal activity. Blow the trumpet in Zion, verse 15, again he says. Sound the alarm. Call the people together. Because this locust problem is not just locusts. It's the day of the Lord. It's divine interruption. What do we want God to do? Again, verse 13 says, in the middle of the verse, he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness, and relenting of evil. Here it is. God is willing to change his mind. That's a powerful statement. Relenting of evil. He actually wants to change his mind. He actually wants to tell the locust to go back home, to go back underground. He wants to reverse the situation. He wants to flip the switch. I mean, he really does. Because it takes him a minute to get hot, slow to anger. And he likes to overflow with loving kindness. Verse 14, who knows whether he will turn and relent and leave a blessing behind? I can't predict what he's going to do with you. You can't predict what he's going to do with me. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know when he's going to do it. Who knows? God is sovereign. He'll choose what he's going to do, when he's going to do it. All I know is he's willing to do it. But then there's a bonus. Verse 25. Then I will make up to you for the years that the swarming locusts have eaten. The bonus here is God can not only reverse, he can make up. He says, I can restore the years that the locusts have taken. You know what many of us have lost that's more precious than anything else? Time. I'm sure in the sound of my voice there are many people who, if you could have done it all over again, if you could turn back the hands of time, if you could just go back and do it all over again, you wouldn't have done it like you did it. And you can look at the days, the months, and the years that have been lost because of bad decisions, wrong decisions, and you've lost all this time, years, that's time. He says, I can give you back the years that the locusts have stolen from you. How he's going to do it, I don't know. You're going to have to taste and see that the Lord is good.
And what keeps us looking forward to that good-tasting future? Quite simply, hope. And Dr. Evans will come back in a moment with a final thought about humanity's ultimate hope and how it can be yours today. Well, today's lesson was the final installment in Tony's current series on revival. So today's your last chance to get all 14 messages in this collection as our way of saying thanks for your contribution in support of our radio and TV outreaches and our work with church leaders as they reach out to their communities. These full-length CDs contain a lot of material we didn't have time to present on the air, so make a point of requesting them today. Just give us a call at 1-800-800-3222, and one of our resource team members will help you make the arrangements. Or check it out online at tonyevans.org. You know, there are thousands and thousands of self-help books on the market, each one claiming to show you how to accomplish your goal or solve a problem on your own. But tomorrow, Dr. Evans will explain why sin is a problem that only one book can help you solve, as he starts a series called Our Great Salvation. Right now, though, he's back to leave us with a vitally important thought for today.
One of the great things all of us need in life is hope. Hope is expectation about the future, that things will be better where I'm going than where I am or where I've come from. And the greatest hope that's given to us by God is the hope of eternal life. That when this life is over, we immediately enter into God's presence and don't have to worry about the scourge called death. So if you want to bypass death, you can do that, because there's the hope of the gospel, the good news that anyone who comes to Christ for salvation, recognizing their sinfulness and their need for forgiveness, will be given that salvation when they come to Jesus.